That was a New Edition, Cool It Now. I remember growing up, my father and mother, and all the fathers and mothers I knew, constantly had newspapers around them. My father read the LA Times and the Herald Examiner every day from cover to cover. Matter of fact, I remember my father getting up early in the morning. He would have a cup of coffee, and he would read the newspaper. He would read all of them. He would read both the Herald Examiner and the LA Times. And I remember when something he found interesting, he would stand and look at the paper and go, and he would mark it down. And he would take his paper, and he would go to work, and he would read more of the newspaper at his lunch hour. And then he would come home, and he would read the newspaper, and then he'd have dinner, and then he'd watch the news. He read the newspaper cover to cover, and it was so in every family's home that I went to. Black people at one point used to read incessantly the newspaper. You couldn't go over a black person's house when they didn't have encyclopedias. Well, our encyclopedias only went to C because it cost $1,000 if you got the whole set. So the last word I knew was Czechoslovakia. That was it. That was the last word I knew. My father and mother insisted that you could use a word as long as you knew where it came from, as long as you could cite the source, and as long as you could use it in a sentence. And they were not formally educated men. Matter of fact, if you a sure way to get an ass whooping is to touch or rearrange my father's newspaper before he had finished it. Information was everywhere. I remember my father would give me money to go get a newspaper, some hog-head cheese for him, and a day-old bread for my mother. And they would read all the time. Matter of fact, Sunday, we would get the newspaper. He would read every article from cover to cover, and he would give us the funny papers. We were learning how to both take in and disseminate information. Matter of fact, it existed. If it didn't exist in the paper, it didn't exist. You didn't have this deluge of misinformation. You couldn't say Biz Markie was dead because it would appear in the obituary. You couldn't lie at a story because that story had a byline and a person's name. And our parents were obsessed with information, and they hated misinformation because misinformation had gotten them in so much trouble. They were determined not to be taken advantage of, and so they acquired knowledge. You could not go over a black person's house without newspapers everywhere. They were everywhere. They would be in the bathroom. You lined the cupboards with them. You wrapped your dishes in them. They sat on the porch. Information was everywhere. And chances are, if you told my father something, my mother something, or somebody I knew something, they could go to a newspaper and cite the article and tell you what had happened. There used to be a time when newspapers existed. They would have the morning edition, the late breaking edition. There was always this incessant need for information, and the people that we came from absorbed that information because they wanted to know. They want let somebody run out of papers. Let my daddy miss a paper to see how bad a mood he was in. Not only did they want information, they wanted to avoid misinformation. They did not want to be led astray. They did not want to be lied to. They did not want to be taken advantage of because they knew how deadly and how dangerous misinformation had been and could be. That's all they did was disseminate information, understand it, and say. Matter of fact, if a newspaper said something wrong, in that same newspaper they would make a retraction. They would say, "We made a mistake on this day, and this is right." Contrast with what we go through now. I remember having a conversation with my mother. I said ain't. She said ain't in the dictionary. I'm going back and forth with her. Finally, I pull out a dictionary in the third, because Webster had several incarnations. In the third one, in 1961, they introduced the word ain't, and I knew that because they would always make me research something. Imagine your mother getting in a conversation with your mother and being right because she gave you the tools to look things up and find things out for yourself and challenge even your parents if you believe they were wrong. Because not only did they want information, they wanted to avoid misinformation. They wanted you to know things and find things out for yourself and to find them from reputable sources. Contrast that with what we're going through right now. This virus, like any other virus, needs for your immunity to be down. It takes advantage of a weakened host. It takes advantage of you when your resistance is lower. And so does misinformation. Much like the virus of your immunity being down, misinformation flourishes when we refuse to be intellectually curious, when we refuse to find things out on our own, when we refuse to find things that are reputable. And that is killing us. They knew how dangerous misinformation was, and we should know it too. Quoting sources that are not verified, saying things that are not true, posting online are killing your people. You might as well be selling them crack. You might as well be selling them some, because that is exactly what you're doing. Misinformation is destroying a lot of valuable lives. You think just because you got a book on herbs, you are now a doctor. You think because you saw something on the internet, now you can quote it. And that thing on the internet, you don't have to have a name. You could just put it out there, and all of a sudden it goes everywhere. You'll respect a person more that appears on the internet or in your timeline than the epidemiologist that went to school for decades. Our parents knew by absorbing information, by understanding the world around them as best they could, by taking all this in, they could avoid they could have information, but avoid misinformation. My mother and father would let me say anything I wanted as long as I could say in a sense. I remember arguing with my brother. My brother, we were talking about the longest word in the English language, and I thought, of course, it was what was it? Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, because I saw that on Mary Poppins. Me arguing back and forth. My father walked over and said, "That's not the longest word in the English language. It is flousy, nousy, nihilification." He pointed it out in the dictionary, and sure enough, he was right. It is the longest word in the English language. Besides non-technical terms, besides medical terms. And it means the estimation of something as worthless. And it's only been used 2 times in American history. 2 times in literature, period. 2 times. Why did my father need to know that? My father swept out planes for a word. He had for a living. He mopped things up. He was a janitor. What did he need to know that for? He needed to know because he wanted to know. And so he did know. And the more he knew, the less you were able to take advantage of it. Because he understood, like we should understand now, like our parents understood before, that misinformation can only do us harm. That is a little note from the GED section. We got the Jazz Report coming up in 15 minutes. It's the D.L. Hughley Show.